like to welcome you back to another episode in Characters from the Bible. And today we're going to be discussing the forefather Abraham. Now, before Abraham was even born, we have to know that there was a story of the Tower of Babel, where the world decided that they were going to rebel against God, and they were going to build this really, really tall tower with the presumption that God was in heaven and they could reach him. And as a result, God created the concept of languages. And it was impossible for them to build this tower together because one person would say one thing, the other person thought he said another, and it was a really big disaster. But the reason why I bring this up is because God, when there were issues before Noah decided he was going to rebuild the world, with this situation where the world started misbehaving again, he decided that he was going to have faith in this one man, Avram, who was going to represent him. And in essence, he was going to be someone that you could look at and get an idea of what God was and what God wanted, as he was, so to speak, an extension of him. What's interesting to notice is that later on in life, God renamed him Avraham, which means father of the nations. As we know, he is the father to a few nations. But what's interesting is that his father named him Avram at birth. And so we have to know that he was presumably someone who stood out if his father was going to call him Avram right off the bat, which in itself is a pretty big compliment. Avram meaning exalted father. He must have had high hopes for him. Now, what was it about Avraham that made him worthy of being the father of the nations? What was it about his character and his actions? So, the thing about him that stood out was that he was a thinker and he searched for truth and facts. In fact, the way he found God was that he was searching for God, and he said, maybe it's the sun. And then when the sun went out at night and the moon came out, he said, okay, maybe it's the moon. But then the moon went back in the morning and the sun came out, and he was looking for something consistent, and he realized that there must have been something that controlled over everything. And as a result, he dared to be different. Now, a little known fact is that he studied from Noah and his son Shem for 39 years. And Noah knew Methuselah, and Methuselah knew Adam. So, Abraham got his information from the very source, and he had a good understanding of how the world came into being and how it functioned from a very young age. The difference between Noah and Abraham is that Noah was given one job, the ark, and Abraham was someone that represented God. And in order to represent God, he had to be tested with challenges, and he had to be giving, show kindness, patience, and in this way, he was able to be this person that forever after was looked up to as one of the greatest men that ever lived, and once again, the father of nations. He had many tests throughout his life. There were 10 tests that stood out. I'm not going to go through all of them, but as an example, when he was a child, he made a claim that he didn't believe in idols, and as a result, King Nimrod threw him in a fire, and he didn't burn. God, who appeared to him many times throughout his life, told him that he should leave his home. And when he did leave his home to go to the land of Canaan, where he was told to go, he faced a famine. He didn't complain. His wife was kidnapped more than once. He didn't complain. And of course, the really big test that he's famous for was the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, his son that he longed for, that he was told to sacrifice. Now, when Isaac was born, Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90. And the reason they called him Isaac was because they thought people might laugh when they see that this child was born to such elderly parents, which shows you how the times changed. Because as I mentioned in the previous episode, people lived to almost 1,000 years just a few generations earlier. Yet over here, if a person has a child when they're 100, it was something that they felt might be laughable. So it just shows you how things can change so quickly. He had a circumcision when he was 99 years old. God commanded him to. There were angels that would appear to him that he took great care in servicing, although God was in front of him, visiting with him. The angels appeared because it was very hot on the day that he had his circumcision, and yet he was running around taking care of them, which must have looked awfully strange, but that's how he was. He was all about giving. He saved Lot. There was a war between kings where Lot was kidnapped. He tried saving Sodom when God told him that he had to turn over the city. It was known, and he was famed for the fact that he had a door on each wall of his home so that guests could always be welcome. So we see that not only was he excelling at the commandment of between man and God, but also between man and man, that he really loved people. And in fact, in the Bible, when he passed away, it just describes simply that he was 175, he was old, and it says he was content. So this was basically an idea of what went on in short during his life and how he excelled and stood out in certain areas. I just wanted to end off by saying that when Sarah was kidnapped, which was more than once, they took her to, she was taken by kings, pharaohs, and these were not ordinary leaders, these were world leaders. And yet you saw that in the conversations in the Bible that Abraham had with these leaders, he spoke very confidently, and they had utmost respect for him. And it's just interesting to notice as I wrap up my description of who Abraham was, to point out that this was a man that was incredibly kind and incredibly giving and incredibly loving and incredibly involved in helping everyone and anyone. But he was able to speak to world leaders face to face with confidence, because one does not negate the other. I want to thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in my next episode, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.